Hey, everybody. Welcome to episode 5 of The Take Back. Today, we are joined by my good friend, Matt Enns. Matt is the Sovereign Man on Instagram, a page dedicated to men reclaiming their marriages and masculinity, as well as a whole bunch of other amazing things that we're going to get into. In this episode, we tackle what healthy masculinity looks like. We tackle what the pursuit of sovereignty looks like and what it means to be a sovereign man. We talk about why maybe therapy isn't the best option for men who need help, and why doing dangerous things is always going to be good for you. So this is a really great episode. You don't want to miss it. We're really happy to bring it to you. And without further ado, here's Matt. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to The Take Back. I'm joined today by our co-host, Mr. David Parker, and our good friend, Matt Enns. Matt, welcome to the show.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sirs. Happy to be here.
You're very, very
It's
welcome.
great to have you. We had you on before in our old show, but I think your message is even more appropriate for what we're trying to do here. And I think in this particular context, what we'd like to talk to you about is how do we take back control of our own lives individually? Because as the good doctor likes to say, you got to clean your own room. You've been very instrumental in my own life in helping me begin to tidy my room. Not going to claim it's clean yet, but it's getting better every day. And I want you to be able to share with our listeners how did you take back your own life, and how do you see your movement, the Sovereign Man movement, as playing a role in helping men take back control of their own lives and therefore having more fulfilling lives, better marriages, things like that. So why don't you start by kind of sharing a bit of your story very briefly, and then we'll go into kind of a more of a dialogue.
Okay. So story briefly is I thought things were going okay. And that was basically my attitude from my late teens until my mid 20s. And around that time, things in my life started to deteriorate and fall apart to the degree where I had to actually recognize things weren't okay. And the more that I started noticing things weren't okay, the more it became apparent that things really weren't okay. And then really obvious things first showed up to me, right? Like the fact that I'd been drunk almost every day since I was 16 years old. That occurred to me as a problem when I was like 27, 28, right? And prior to that, the story I was telling myself was everything is fine. And that was also the story I was telling everybody around me. And that was the social mask I was wearing with everybody around me. And so as things fell apart to a greater and greater degree, kind of culminating with my marriage falling apart with 2 kids at the time, which has since wonderfully come back together, which we'll get into, I'm sure. But that caused me to really look and say, okay, I got to take an honest inventory of my life. Things aren't working, and the story I'm telling myself is obviously untrue. And so just how many lies am I telling myself? And as I started to go down that path and be genuinely honest with myself for the first time, which is an incredibly difficult thing to do, I found out that most of what I was telling myself was completely untrue, and that I was almost all a lie. It's like Jordan Peterson says, if you allow the dead wood to burn away, you might find out that you're 96% dead wood. And that's what I experienced. Is I went through this 18-month process, 2-3 hours a day of kind of going through my memories and dissecting, okay, that was how I interpreted it at the time, but what actually took place. So kind of redefining my understanding of my entire life. And there was really nothing left of me at the end. So I don't recommend doing that. And then I went on this rebuilding process, and that rebuilding process, I'm sure we'll get into what that looks like, but that rebuilding process ended up with me getting back together with my wife, moving to a new country, selling my old business, starting a new business, getting in good shape, getting disciplined, getting healthy, getting clean as far as the way I eat, the things that I consume. And that's what I teach my clients now. So we can unpack whatever part of that you're most interested in unpacking.
Yeah, 2 things. Real quick, move that microphone closer to your face.
Thank you.
That's better. Thank you. Then the question, when you did that that self-reflection, did you do that entirely on your own, or did you do that with someone else?
So I had a psychologist who's an incredible person who I ended up working with eventually. But the majority of that was on my own. And um, most of the really meaningful unpacking of my own negative patterns and belief systems, and then the rebuilding of it, most of it was on my own.
That's crazy.
It's part of what made it so dangerous.
Well, yeah, dangerous, but also interesting in the sense that, like, what do you think gave you the understanding on how to even approach that? Like, what you were doing was unbuilding beliefs that you had had your entire life, but that's really, I can imagine, hard to do without someone else helping you walk through even figuring out what those beliefs are.
Desperation was what enabled me to understand that. There was nothing else. I think probably my greatest character quality is my curiosity, and so that helps. I'm an infinitely curious person, and so I approached it like a problem that has an answer somewhere if I can only find it. And I looked everywhere before I finally did find something that worked. But the only reason I was able to understand any of this was because the weight of the pain, the social anxiety, the depression, the hopelessness was just so great. And I had a wife and a kid, so I didn't have any excuses where it's like, well, it's fine if I don't fix this problem. It's like I had to fix this problem, and that desperation and that curiosity is what drove me to find the things that did work and the methods that I've developed since.
So it's kind of like a rock bottom, eh?
100%.
So what was that like? Like when you hit the bottom of that pit, where was your heart?
Where was my heart?
Yeah.
Um, no idea. My heart wasn't really part of the picture at that point. Um, I existed just in my head. Everything was racing thoughts and overanalyzing and catastrophizing and panic and thinking of how bad everything can go and why this person's upset with me and why tomorrow is going to go badly and why this is going to go wrong and why that's going to make me broke. And that's all that there was. And when I hit rock bottom, I was really just alone with those demons in my head. It wasn't until I started healing and finding that source of internal power that my heart kind of came online, and I started to live from my head and my heart. But prior to rock bottom, and even for a while after coming back out of rock bottom, my heart didn't really play into it at all, which is part of the problem.
Yeah, interesting.
So how would you say that that's internal power? We have a friend who calls it an elevated power in your chest. There's a lot of different names for it. Some people call it faith. Whatever you want to call it. How did you find that? What was your first inkling that was part of the problem?
The first inkling was when I realized that thinking wasn't going to get me out of the problem. And then I took that further and I realized like there's no cognitive or intellectual solution. Like this is an emotional issue, and I can't think or analyze my way out of certain feelings. I can tell myself that, like I had very bad social anxiety. I can tell myself talking to my mom on the phone is not a scary thing, but talking to her on the phone would still sometimes cause me, racing heart, adrenaline. And I'm using my mom as an example because if there's anywhere that should be safe, it's there. Like, never mind strangers or anything else. Those are horrific for me. But even my mom on the phone, it was tough. It was like I was on stage in front of a million people and losing my voice, right? And you can't think your way out of that. And I tried to think my way out of that for probably over 10 years. And when I realized that it was a nervous system issue, that it was a subconscious issue, that it was a heart issue, and I developed a new angle of approach, that's when things began to get better. But it takes a very long time to turn off. It takes a very long time to stop sending all of your internal energy to your mind, because especially growing up in the scientific West, which we all have, the supremacy of thinking is not as natural as breathing to us, right? And men have three natural energy centers. There's a million schematics for how you look at energy centers, but our useful one is we have the big head, we have the heart, and we have the little head, right? And most of us are numb in the chest. We don't know how to feel. We don't even know what we're feeling. And a lot of my clients, I literally have a cheat sheet of like emotions. And when I ask them what they're feeling, and they say the same thing, they say angry, annoyed, pissed off, or maybe sad, right? But they don't know that hopelessness is an emotion, rejection is an emotion. There's dozens of them, right? So we literally put up a cheat sheet and help them find it, because men don't really know what we're feeling all the time. And what happens then is all the energy rushes to our head, overthinking, or to our little head, which is compulsive behavior, gambling, addictions, sexual compulsions, etc. And you have to allow that energy to flow through all three centers. And when you operate from all three centers, that's when you're a really, really powerful individual, and you get that intuition, that guidance, that gnosis, that knowing from a deeper part of you that isn't a cognitive knowing, isn't a cognitive understanding. It's something deeper. And it's very difficult to articulate in words what that is. But anybody who's experienced that, a deeper knowing, you know exactly what it is. And it feels tangibly different. But to put it in words, especially in English, German probably has some 52-letter word for it. But in English, I don't know how to express it verbally, but it's a very different form of knowing. It's much deeper.
Well, the Buddhists call it enlightenment. The Christians call it revelation. It is a
Yes.
knowledge that doesn't come, like you said, from thought.
Yeah.
But I think like you made an interesting point that I want to dig into. One of the ways that I've personally experienced what you're describing is when you realize that you're not just a spiritual being. Like, you talk a lot about the body, and I've followed a lot of your kind of ideas around food and health and things like that. And you want to talk about when you said it was a nervous system issue, when you said it was a body issue. People don't address that. They think, oh, I can therapy my way out of these problems. But very often therapy is the last thing they need. They don't need to think about things anymore. Like you said, they need to change how they're living, because how they're living is the emergent quality of how they're living is how they're feeling. You want to talk a little bit about how you took control of your own habits and what that did for your, let's call it anxiety, for your all of the issues, your nervous system issues as you described it.
Yeah. We live in an era of hyper specialization and sub expertise and subspecialties, right? And so whenever we're going to solve a problem, we usually try to find a expert in a specific field. And the human experience, the human body is an ecosystem. The human experience is, we are an entire kingdom, right? And if you can integrate the parts of yourself, you can become the king of that kingdom. But, you know, within my body, there are trillions of creatures that are not human, right? Gut bacteria, etc. And so anytime we try to fix any human issue with a single approach, you're missing the point. This is a very complex system we have here, right? The interplay of the spirit, the mind, the body, all of this. And so you have to take a comprehensive approach. And so many people that are really good on the spiritual or intellectual side, they ignore the physical side. And you know, it has to be every part of you has to be oriented and integrated and pointed in the same direction. And so with your body, the three things that I've found are absolutely necessary for self-development, especially in men, is you have to exercise, you have to eat according to certain rules, and you have to have a strict wake-up time. And that strict wake-up time can be any time, depending on who you are and what works for you. But you can't just wake up when you feel good. You have to start the day with intention, start the day with discomfort, start the day with a sense of purpose and intentionality, and then the day continues in that direction. But if you start the day by just self-indulging or waking up to feel good and cozy, well, that's how the day goes. So there, exercise for men, it's incredibly important to exercise. And I like weightlifting. I think that's so important for men to do, especially in the sedentary lives that we have. And like Nietzsche said, there's more wisdom in your body than all of your philosophy. And it's so true. That's part of why the Greeks, you know, education used to be rhetoric and gymnasium, right? They would wrestle. And jujitsu is a wonderful outlet for this as well, because we live in such an artificial world, right? We press a button to watch TV, we press a button to order food, we press a button to get somebody to come fix something in our sink. We don't get direct feedback from reality. And if you're wrestling, or if you're doing jujitsu or Muay Thai, any lies you're telling yourself disappear immediately when you get punched in the face. You can tell yourself you're amazing at fighting, but when you get hit, you know you're not, right? So exercise is so important for the mind, not just because it makes your body and your brain healthier, but because it makes your mind function in alignment with reality more so. And then what you eat. And I found that for me, diet was an enormous part of my anxiety. Now, I had a deep psychological insecurity. That was the root issue that I had to address. But eating certain foods made that alarm system sound 10 times louder in my ears. So when I stopped eating those foods, the same thoughts were there, but they're much, 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 much quieter. And so I found that not eating industrial food and eating actual food is a big deal. And that's hard for us to do because, we literally have a non-poison section in our grocery stores, right? Called the organic section. We have a label for food that has not been poisoned. Like we're living in a time of such incredible corruption in every single major area of human endeavor, and food is no different. And to actually just say, okay, I'm going to eat food the way that it would have been eaten at any point in the last 2,000 years, instead of eating this industrial product that's been created in the last 50, just doing that is very, very difficult. But if you do that, it's amazing how your spirit comes back online, your mind and your mental clarity comes back online, your physical energy, your sleep, all these, plus all the other well-known benefits we're very, very aware of. But those three things are really the foundation of taking control of your life. It's almost like the clean your room idea, right? You can control when you wake up, you can control what you eat, and you can control how you move your body. You can't control climate change, you can't control inflation, but you can control those three things. And if you get good at controlling those three things, then you can start expanding that domain outward into ever more and more complex areas, which is what happened with me, and which is what happened with all the clients that I work with who do that. It naturally begins to expand.
You want to talk a little? Well, I'll share first that I was your first student, which I'm quite proud of. You called me and you said, I'm starting a new business, David, and I want to use you as a test case. And I, as one of our friends said in his song that's coming out soon, I was a bit of a mess at that moment in my life. And I definitely needed your guidance and your wisdom. And I had personally been your friend for, I think, about a decade at that point, and maybe longer actually, and had watched this transformation that you were going through. And so I had the respect for you to listen to what you were saying, even though, and you know this, I thought it was kind of silly that you were starting a new career as a life coach, but it actually transformed my life. And for me, it's the old laundry example. I remember talking to you on the phone and saying, why am I so incompetent that I can't even do laundry? Like, what is wrong with me? How did I not get, and not to say that I haven't done laundry in my life, but like I couldn't bring myself to do laundry at many moments in my life. And you said, well, that's because you think laundry is easy, that it's just a simple task that you could just do and be done. But actually laundry is a whole bunch of little tasks, none of which you're good at right now, because you're a white belt at laundry. You're treating yourself like you should be a black belt, but you're a white belt. And what you had me do was change my eating habits. That was the number one thing that I did in following your instruction. And I lost tons of weight. My mental clarity improved. And I was able to begin addressing a lot of the other things that I don't know that I would have been able to if I'd kept eating the way that I was. Now my wife and I, we're very focused on health, natural supplements, naturopaths, very careful about what we eat. We follow that direction. But what I find interesting is a lot of therapists, they never tell you what to do to help yourself. Do you want to talk a little bit about that and how what you're doing is not therapy, it's more coaching, and literally the success rate that you've seen? Maybe I will share more of how you helped me, but I'm just so fascinated by the fact that you're taking a very different approach to this therapeutic world we live in, which I think is absolutely ridiculous. And we're spending a lot of time medicating symptoms instead of addressing diseases. But I'd like to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very broad question because I have so many criticisms of the modern therapeutic approach. But I guess at base, it's a female approach. And my primary, I have different coaching options that I offer, but my primary offer is one to help men who are at some point in the process of separation or divorce save their marriage. And like you said, we have an insane track record on that compared to any other people in the space. And women, part of what I teach my men all the time is women need emotional validation, because what happens is men and women get in a fight and the guy will think she's factually incorrect and he'll focus on her being factually incorrect. And even if he proves her wrong or proves himself right, she just gets even more unhappy, right? Because she needs for her emotions to be validated. She navigates the world through her feelings and her intuition. And if you invalidate that, that's invalidating who she is and how she navigates the world. Similar to if you invalidate a man's beliefs or a man's opinions, you're invalidating the way that he navigates the world, right? So it's very important for women to have their feelings validated. It's not that important for men to have their feelings validated. But when men go to therapy, that's usually what they're getting is they're talking about how they're feeling, and they're talking about how they're feeling, they're talking about how they're feeling. And after 2 or 3 sessions, they're like, yeah, it felt kind of good to get it off my chest, but like, what do I do now? Right? Men, testosterone itself is results oriented. We want a goal, we want an aim, we want something to shoot at, something to direct our efforts towards. And without being given that, there's no point to therapy. Yeah, it feels a little bit good, but there's no point. Men need a point, a direction. And so, although the inspiration and the learning that I've done for my coaching style comes almost exclusively from psychoanalysts and existential psychologists, the approach that I take is more of a coaching approach, which is, okay, here's what you're going to go do now. Here's the homework for this week. Here's the assignment. Here's the next thing to achieve. Here's the next thing. And it's the sequential building of going through, okay, we're going to excavate the negative patterns from your subconscious mind and replace them with patterns that you believe are aligned with the life that you want to lead. We're going to build a system of values that you believe are important to you, not just ones we're going to pick arbitrarily, but this discovery of who God made you to be, who you're meant to be, the person you are on an innate level. What are those values? What are those skills? What are those character qualities? We're going to build a framework from that. And then we're going to find out what you're meant to be doing with your life. And we're going to create a purpose and discipline habits that will move you towards your purpose. And men, almost no matter how much pain they're in, if you're like, hey, this is a noble goal that you can move towards, they will just start moving towards it. It doesn't matter if they have to crawl through broken glass to get there. It doesn't matter how much pain they're in. Like, they're going to start going there. But if you don't give men a point, they just flounder. They don't know what to do. And so modern therapy is about emotional validation. And you can get good therapists. I have one. And they do a very good job at helping you figure out where you want to go on your own. But like every area of expertise in 2024, 96% of them are not only not very good at what they do, but actively counterproductive to the stated aims of their occupation. And I think most therapists are going to make things worse. And we're the most therapized people of all time, and we're the most mentally unhealthy. And kids get an insane amount of therapy, and kids are more mentally unhealthy than they've ever been. It's not working, right? And therapy is kind of like government. And they're like, well, if our program didn't work, it's proof that we need it to be bigger. It's like, no, it's actually proof that it wasn't set up properly and it's not doing what it's supposed to do. So scrap it. But unfortunately in therapy, if it doesn't work, it is proof you need to do more. And I think it's a problem with how it operates. It's not a problem of not having enough of it.
Do you think it's more effective for women, therapy in our modern age, than it is for men? Or is it equally ineffective for both?
I think it's maybe slightly more effective. I think therapy for women will at least, it can produce an emotional boost for them where they feel better as a result and they're happier. But because women want emotional validation, the problem with women is they'll often just find therapists who validate whatever they're feeling, right?
Yeah.
And that's some professional version of, you be who you are, you got this, girl. And it's like, well, sometimes your therapist needs to be like this, which is, you're full of shit and you need to stop lying to yourself. But if most of the time, if a female gets that from her therapist, she's not going back to that therapist.
She's firing that therapist. Yeah.
She's firing that therapist. Yeah. So,
whereas I don't know if this is true. I'd love to hear both of your thoughts on this, but I feel like that's kind of what a man wants to hear. I mean, I'll never forget, this was a couple of years ago. I always had this conception of myself as a very honest person. I've always prided myself in trying to always tell the truth, and like, even if it hurts to tell the truth. And I'll never forget you being like, actually, David, that's not true at all. You often don't do what you say. You often we had a session where you kind of broke me down a little bit and confronted me on things I wasn't willing to address because I didn't even think of them as something that was going on. And at the time, it was a very hard conversation, but I think I needed that more than I even knew. And I think men need to be told they're full of shit. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on that, but there's not enough of that going on in our society.
Well, I'll react. Yeah. I'll react real quick, and then I'll let Matt speak to it because he's the one who's actually going to speak to it. The notion of being told I'm full of shit, even just in this moment, is kind of exciting. So that's really all I have to say on that. I'll turn it over to Matt, but that's just like my visceral emotional reaction to the thought of that conversation.
Yeah, and there's that old adage like, don't fix her problems, just listen to her, right? But men want to fix. And so if somebody says there's a problem, we're like, oh, we get to fix it and things get to get better and I get to get stronger, faster, smarter. Like, this is awesome. And there's a reason why therapists don't want to tell their clients what to do, right? And there's good reason for that, because you take away their inner power, you take away their journey. But there's also a place for kicking somebody's ass a little bit. And I think it's a dangerous line to straddle. But even in your case, I didn't come right out and say, dude, you lie more than you think you do. I just said, well, what about this? And I asked you enough questions in kind of a Socratic way till you're like, and I remember you saying this, like, oh, maybe I'm not as honest as I thought. Right. And what a skilled coach, therapist, counselor, whatever will do is like, they can help you realize that on your own. Now, the nice thing about coaching is that sometimes, a client will have one single session with me and that's it. And so I'll basically say, hey, look, I'm going to skip some steps here and I'm going to cut some corners and I'm just going to call you out on some things because I want you to get the most value from this 90-minute session we've got. We don't have 6 sessions to do this. And so here we go. And this is your problem. This is your problem. This is your problem. This is your problem. And that's a dangerous game to play because if it's the wrong person, that can really send them into a spiral. So you have to be skilled doing that. And so far, I've done a good job of that. Thank God. But with the right person, when you have that approach, they're like, I just wanted somebody to tell me this. Like everybody's been lying to me. Everybody's been telling me I'm great. Everybody's been telling me I'm doing a good job. Keep my head up. And nobody's just told me, hey, you're full of shit and this needs to change. And that's what dads used to do 50 years ago. Right. And now what dads are told to do is ask them how they're feeling and tell them they're perfect and tell them, and it's like, sometimes you should be told, dude, you're fucking up. You're doing a shitty job of this. I expect so much more of you. And the role of the modern coach is the role of the ritual elder in the tribe, of the shaman, of the tribal elder, which is calling people out sometimes and encouraging them to see the higher version of themselves. And since we don't have that role in culture anymore, that's why my occupation exists.
Very interesting.
That's the most interesting part, is that it's a role that dads used to play. Can you speak more on that?
Definitely. Dads don't really exist anymore, right? They're very rare. We have male mothers by and large now. And in a lot of relationships, if the man steps up to be a dad, he will get attacked and shut down and castrated by his wife because he's going to damage the child. He's creating trauma. He's going to cause injury. And most men aren't equipped well to handle the kind of attacks of the feminine like that. And so they just submit to it. And what happens is she ends up basically running the parenting, which inevitably becomes she runs everything. And he ends up being a passenger in his own life. And he resents her for castrating him. She resents him for not stepping up and being a man and making her be in charge of everything and have all this pressure on him all the time. Both of them hate each other. The sexual polarity goes out the window and they end up getting divorced. Right. And I see this all the time in what I do. And part of that is dads aren't in a place anymore where they can just be like, dude, like brush it off, get up, you're fine. And I'm lucky I had a dad who did that. Right. Because my mom was very much like not like that, but she was wise enough to know, okay, the kids have a winter sled behind a 4-wheeler in the middle of summer, and they're doing donuts in the backyard and going down the highway beside our house, dragging this winter sled behind a 4-wheeler without helmets on. Elwood, that's my dad's name. Elwood, go watch them. I can't watch this. And she would just leave and let it happen. Right. Mm-hmm. And when we get hurt, my dad was the only one there and he'd be like, you're fine, get up, don't worry about it. And that taught me that, okay, I guess I can get up and I can be okay. And there isn't a whole lot of that anymore. You see both parents being kind of like mums. When the kid gets hurt, it's like the end of the world and everybody has to crowd around the kid and make sure it's okay and get the right kind of, ointment and the right kind of Band-Aid. And it's like, it's this whole thing. And it's kind of it's part of a wider problem we have in society too, where we don't have like the drunk racist uncles that we need anymore. And, like those are the guys that
go on.
If 20 years ago they had been involved, they had been on school boards, they've been on local electoral committees, and somebody comes up and says men and women are the same and little boys and little girls get to choose what gender they are, that drunk racist uncle would have said, sit the fuck down, you moron. And that would have been the end. And like, it wouldn't have gone any further. But since we don't have those people anymore, all we have is like really polite, demasculinized people. We have somebody that says, okay, I don't think that that's a very good idea. And let's have a civil conversation about why it's not a good idea to mutilate young children. Let's talk this through. And like, that's not the right approach, right? And now I'm not saying we should emulate the drunk racist uncle, but that energy of like having a powerful no, this is moronic, I'm not entertaining it, that's missing in society as well as in families as well as in fathers.
Yeah, one of the most dangerous things we did as a society was to build safe spaces, isn't it?
Oh, it's insane. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's also just a gigantic lie, right? Because the idea that you're safe in nature or in the world at all is totally fabricated. You are not safe. Nobody's safe. Like, this is.
And I also think like what an evil thing to do to your children, to tell them this lie that they can be kept safe from the dangers of the world, because at some point they're going to find out it's not true and they can't be kept safe from the dangers. And imagine if that point, that's their first genuine exposure to danger or risk or consequences for their action. And the first time they're exposed to that is when they're 21, 24, 27. They're done. They'll never have a good life. They'll never have richness in their relationships. They'll never have a rewarding career. They will be incapable, malfunctioning human beings forever. And the parents did that because they're so kind and loving. And it's absolutely awful. You have to teach your kids, not that the world isn't dangerous and you can keep them safe from the danger, but that they're capable of handling the danger. But right when they get hurt and they scrape their knee, no, dude, you can get back up. You're fine. And then learn, oh, I can handle that. Right. And if you learn that enough times, you grow into a strong, capable adult. But most of us, even if we had wonderful parents, the ethos of the society we live in is that safe space ethos. And so we absorbed some of that to some degree. I know I certainly did. And when real life hit me, I had no idea how to handle it, to the point where I had to ignore all of real life.
Well, to the point where you had to drink to make sure that you weren't dealing with real life.
The only way I could escape the pressure, because hiding from reality is a losing game, because reality is bigger than you, right? And it gets very taxing on your nervous system, on your mind, to hide from reality. And the only way I could alleviate that pressure was to get drunk, and then I'd be like, and the pressure wouldn't be there anymore, because I didn't care how scary the world was when I was drunk, right? Because you don't care about that stuff when you're drunk. But you have to teach kids how to handle this, and that is the role of dads. Moms don't generally do that. They're meant to play a very different role. They're meant to make you feel loved and to give you safety and to respond to your childish needs and everything. But it's the role of, moms turn babies into boys, dads turn boys into men. And we don't have any cultural mechanisms for turning boys into men anymore. We don't have any initiation process. We don't have rituals. So many men are 30, 35, 40, 50 years old, and they don't feel like men yet because nobody actually came along and said, now you're a man. And as silly as that sounds, we need a ritual to teach us that we're men in order to actually feel like we're men. And that's one of the many reasons why we don't have men who are standing up and saying, stop the crazy.
So
there's something I want to get at here, because I don't want to miss the opportunity to make an actionable point for all of those men out there who want to be told that they're making mistakes and need an actionable point. In the scenario of a father who's trying to raise young children and trying to teach those young children to take on risk and to get hurt and to get up and be that kind of father, that path is simple enough to interpret, and it's easy enough to make sense of, like, I need to teach my kid to be strong. But it's much more complex to navigate having the wife step in and say, you shouldn't be putting those kids in that risk or allowing them to take on that risk. How does a man begin to unpack and work that portion of the problem out with his wife?
Okay. Well, I have a 6-month course if you want to get my full answer to that question. But the short answer is, you have to understand what it is to be a man in relationship, and you have to show up with that energy. And you can have the exact same woman and the exact same man, and you can go over to her at the park and say, hey, baby, I don't think he should be I don't think you should be interfering with him when he's on the monkey bars. Like, I think it's okay if he like gets hurt. Don't you think so? No, I don't. It's horrible. It's horrible. Okay. Then nothing happens. She wins. Nothing changes with him. He still gets supervised and overparented. You can have the exact same man, the exact same woman, but he approaches her and he goes, hey, look, I appreciate that you're trying to keep him safe, but he needs to learn that if he's not careful, there are consequences. And if he doesn't learn on the monkey bars, he's going to learn driving a car when he's drunk with his friends when he's 17. And you need to step back and let this happen. So if you need to like go inside and I'll stay here and watch him, I'm totally fine to do that, but this needs to happen. And anytime the feminine can sense the certain masculine, she can sense that certainty, she's very likely to go along with it. But most men, they have kind of baby gloves with the way they communicate to their wives, because women can be upset if you communicate with them the wrong way. And men don't understand the difference between communicating with confidence and communicating with tyrannical, domineering abuse, because all masculinity is toxic now, right? But speaking firmly and with confidence and with love and patience is very, very different than being rude, being an asshole, being demeaning, being domineering, because none of that is ever good. And I'd never recommend any of that. So the first thing, again, I don't know how to answer this more succinctly than this. You have to develop that kingly man energy inside of yourself and learn the interplay of masculine and feminine energies in your relationship. And if you can learn how those two energies play with each other, you can begin to lead the feminine similar to how the male leads the female in a dance, right? They're both dancing, they're both doing it voluntarily, they're both having a wonderful time, but he's leading it, which enables her to become the star of the show and to show off her grace. Because the man who's leading a dance, no one's watching him. He's just there to facilitate us watching the beautiful, graceful movements of the female. And a marriage is no different. If you have a strong man leading, that's when she gets to become the star of the show and she gets to shine. But since we don't understand the difference between healthy leading and being a tyrannical, domineering abuser, men end up just taking the back seat and becoming mom number two. And you get these underdeveloped kids, especially boys.
So I want to ask each of you a question, because this will help, I think, people reflect on it, then I'll answer it. But what was the moment in your life that you felt like a man, where you're like, I'm a man now? Zach.
I don't remember a specific moment, but I remember a period in my life where I had several days where at the end of the day, I just remember looking back at the day and being like, man, I've never had this feeling before, but if a meteorite hit my house, or if I died right now, I would feel like I've done everything I need to do. And that was a result of taking a very close look at who I was, how I spent my time, how I reacted in hard situations, how I reacted to challenge, and being honest about where I was falling short and where I could be, and then practicing being a little bit better at that over time. And I got to a point where, you go through a whole day and you look back and you're like, man, I was good at the office today. I was good with my wife. I was good with my children. I was good at taking care of my home. I was who I wanted to be today. And I don't think that's any different than feeling like a man. When you can look back on an hour, a day, a week, a month and say, I was good. That to me is no different than being a man. And so that was not that many years ago where I first experienced that.
It's tough to call up specific examples. I can think of a couple. I like what you said, Matt. I like the idea of sitting back at the end of something and going like, okay, I handled that. Like, especially if it's something that scares you. The more I grow up, the more I try to do things that scare me as often as possible. And anytime I step out and I do something that scares me and I find out that I can do it, I get that feeling of like, okay, I can handle the world. I can handle what's in front of me. There is danger, but I can be bigger than it. So that's something that I try to key in on. I have another specific example that is absolutely going to piss some people off, specifically the ones who associate themselves with the organization PETA. But a lot of you talk about masculine ritual or initiation or like that sort of thing, and how we don't really have those things built into our culture. I had a friend a number of years ago take me hunting. He's like, man, you just got to get outside. You got to hunt. And going hunting in and of itself, that has been an experience that has made me feel more masculine. But there was one specific moment in hunting where I was hunting turkey and I shot a turkey and I had a bad hit and it flew off and took my arrow with it and went into the forest, and I had to go chase it down, and I chased it down and I found it alive. And this is the part that's really, really going to bother people. I had a decision to make. I found it. It was sitting there. It was wounded, obviously very hurt. I felt awful. I felt absolutely ripped up inside. And I'm sitting there just like, shit, what do I do? And I literally looked at it. I was like, please die, please die, please die. And it wasn't dying. And so I had a decision to make. And the decision that I made, and the decision I believe was the right decision, was I snuck up behind it, I grabbed its neck, and I chopped its head off. And I finished the job because I had put that animal in a position that was painful. And what I don't want to draw out of that is like masculine, like violence and energy and all of that sort of thing. But what I do want to say is that like that experience really, really stuck with me. And I sat there for quite a while after, like very taken aback by what had just happened. And as I thought more and more about it, I thought about this idea of, I think it's Peterson who talks about it. He says every person, and I guess in this context we're talking about masculinity. So every man has violence and darkness within them, and that doesn't go away. It's the reason that we can do horrible, horrible, horrible things like the Holocaust and all of that stuff. It's because every person has some string of violence and darkness that runs through them. But avoiding that darkness and avoiding that violence is what creates things, violent things that happen that aren't good. And what I believe happened when I snuck up behind that turkey and I took its head off to end its misery is that I incorporated the violent side of my being for a good outcome, even though it wasn't something like I didn't want to do it. I was asking it to die so that I didn't have to. I was sitting there asking it to die. I was saying, please die so that I don't have to do this. And it didn't. So I had to do it, and it did. And it took me a few days to process it. But coming out of that situation, even though I wish I had made a better shot, and there's lots of lessons in there, even though I wish I could have handled it differently, ultimately, when it came time to make the decision to incorporate the darkness or the violence within me to affect good, that was something that I did even though I didn't want to do it. And that I walked out of that particular moment going, okay, I made a tough call and like literally got blood on my hands, but it was the right decision. And that's something that definitely stuck with me.
Yeah, that's an example of shadow integration to some degree, right? It's like you recognize this dark part, but rather than using it for destruction, you're using it for a moral good. You're channeling that darkness intentionally towards what you believe is right, rather than being taken over by that dark energy and using it for whatever the dark energy wants to use it for, right? And we all have that darkness inside of us, and part of every masculine initiation rite historically, because again, we're the only civilization in the history of humanity that doesn't have them, is integrating that capacity for violence and learning that, whoa, I can do some serious damage. I'm a very, very dangerous person. That's the beginning of learning how to channel that properly. And there's no one more dangerous than a man who doesn't think he's capable of doing evil. Those are the guys you want to keep as far away from power, because they have a monster inside of them like we all do, but their monster has never been out of the cage before. And if it gets out of the cage, it's going to bite everything that's near it. You want to be able to integrate it. And going back to David's question earlier about when I first felt like a man, a big part of that was actually when I started doing jujitsu. And initially in jujitsu, you just get beat up by everybody, including girls that are half your size. And there's still many, many girls that beat me up all the time who are way better than me. But the first few times you get tapped out and submitted by a 100-pound girl, and you realize the only reason I'm not dead is because she decided to let go when I tapped. That's a crazy feeling. But you do that enough times and you start beating people your size, you start beating people that are bigger than you. And you walk around with this deep primal knowledge that, oh, I can actually handle myself in a physical confrontation. I can channel my capacity for violence intentionally with the purpose. I have instincts that I've honed. That is so important for being a man. That's part of why in so many historical cultures and in mythology, you have to go through the warrior stage before you can be the king, right? You can't be a good king unless you've first been a good warrior. And we have no capacity to help people get through that warrior phase. And so, there's the military and there's other things that people go through, but as an entire society, we don't have any mechanism for taking people through the warrior phase, which is again, another reason why people don't feel like men. You have to be able to trust in your own capacity for violence and your own capacity to channel that appropriately. Because if not, you'll be terrified of that part of you, and you'll try to hide it from yourself, making it even more likely to come out in a damaging, dangerous, destructive way later. So that experience that you had, Zach, or martial arts, other hunting experiences, military, these teach you about that part of yourself. And that's something that you have to integrate in order to feel like a man and to really be a man. And anybody who doesn't have experience with hunting, with the military, with martial arts, a sparring martial art, you don't know what you don't know. And if you go on a few hunting trips, if you take 6 months of boxing, you will change how you view yourself. You'll change how you view the world, and you will feel much more like a man. And if you haven't done that and you haven't acquired that knowledge of yourself, you're handicapped in a way you don't even realize. It's a really, really important process for men to go through.
Absolutely. David, we never got your story. Why don't you hit us with one?
Yeah, it's funny because I would say that the moment that I felt like a man was when I decided to do things again, funnily enough, against authority and the structure that exists. Because I spent my 20s as a servant to the powerful. I like to say that I was a butler. And I think that there was a lot of rage that built up inside of me because I was just, treated like essentially a servant. And they were good people. I had good masters, good bosses, you could call it, and bad masters, bad bosses. But I was always under someone else's authority. But in 2019, so not even that long ago, I decided to stand up for what I believed was right and to challenge the authority structure of the Conservative Party of Canada. At the time, the leader was Andrew Scheer. And I think that was the moment when I decided to take a stand for what I believed in, despite what I imagined would have been severe consequences. That was my whole world, was the Conservative Party, really. And the funny thing is I'd already basically been pushed out of it at that point, but it was still, when I quit my job because I didn't want my decisions to reflect on my employer. And I've never had a job since because I became a sovereign man, one might say. But it was that moment of making the decision to drop the safety of employment and do what I believed was right, which I will tell you has been one of the most painful and horrible experiences of my life, not having the safety of a paycheck and not knowing where my next meal is going to come from necessarily, and getting into huge amounts of debt at times. But I will say that journey is what I would argue made me a man, and 2019 was when I started on that journey. But it's funny, I don't think that I actually thought of myself as a man until a couple of years ago, but that would be the moment. I think you have to do something dangerous. I think that's what it comes down to. You have to step up to the plate and say, no, no matter what the consequences are, I believe this is right and I'm going to do it. It's like your example with the turkey. You did what you believed was right, even though it was hard. Now, I've killed a lot of chickens in my day in a similar manner, so it probably would not have been nearly as difficult for me. But the point is, you hadn't done it before. And I know the first time I killed a chicken, it felt terrible. And by the 100th time, you're like, well, I'm going to eat well tonight, right? But you knew that the suffering was occurring, and you knew you had to end that suffering. And so you did something. And, who knows? It could have turned around and smacked you with its wing. Who knows what it could have done, right? But you made that decision. And for me, I think that was a big turning point. And then I would say the second big turning point was actually, funnily enough, starting coaching with Matt and actually taking responsibility for my life instead of feeling like I was a passive observer, or even worse, I would say just, a victim, that things happened to me and this was just the way I was, instead of saying, well, no, I could become something. I can aim at a thing and do it. And I was honestly floored by the impact that change of perspective had on my entire life, and the things that I've done since then. I would accredit to a change of perspective that Matt brought to me.
Appreciate it.
But Matt, you've talked to a lot of men. You've helped a lot of men. You're becoming a figure in a movement that is committed to this kind of personal responsibility. You call it the Sovereign Man movement. Why don't you share a little bit what the philosophy of that is, and why you're excited about what you're doing, and you're living such a more fulfilling and prosperous life because of the pursuit of that, and how others can follow your, let's call it, model or framework to see that in their own life.
Yeah, there's a whole bunch of questions there. So I'll kind of pick and choose. My philosophy with Sovereign Man is that we need more men operating from a position of strength and freedom in order to save us from all the many perils and problems that we're facing in the West. And I think there are solutions at every level, right? You're operating largely at the political level. Other people are operating at the educational level. But I think none of that works unless you have individuals of character, men with chests, as C.S. Lewis would say, to call to your cause and to put on the school boards and to put on the electoral boards. So I want to create, this army of men who are empowered and strong and capable and who are acting from their own principles. I don't want to create a bunch of people who think the way that I do. I want to create men who have that sense of inner authority, that told you, no, I'm going to go against the party that I've been serving for the last 15 years and risk everything because I think this is wrong. Men who are listening to that voice of inner authority, some of them will go this way politically, some of them will go that way politically, but they'll all go where they're meant to go. And that's what I mean by sovereign men, right? I don't want people who think and act the same way. I want people who are operating from their highest potential, and experiencing fulfillment and power and strength and freedom in the process. And part of why I'm working in relationships now is when a man goes through transformation, it's an initiatory process, right? He gets introduced to pain and darkness and despair. The world that he once knew begins to disintegrate. It isn't working. And then he has to build something new to navigate once he goes back into the world, right? So that period of transformation is a sacred time. It's in a sacred space. And in some sense, it's outside of space and time, because if you've ever been through a dark period in your life, time does not move at the same speed, right? Relationships don't feel the same. Everything feels different. It's like you're in a different dimension. And that's a sacred dimension. And that can happen at certain ages. It can also happen because of crises in your life. And the number one cause for that period of darkness and transformation in the modern industrial world for men is separation or divorce. And it's happening at unprecedented levels right now. And it's initiated primarily by women, which means it's not men who are wanting to get divorced. It's men who desperately do not want to get divorced, but are facing the loss of their wife that they love, their children, their financial security, all of this. And when you get a man who's going through that kind of intense initiation and transformation, they're very ripe to be guided towards a stronger version of themselves. You can't just pick out somebody whose life is going rather well and say, you should do everything differently from now on. Why? Right?
Right.
That's why when you look at people who go through incredible transformations and become these admirable, stellar, exemplary humans, every single one of them without exception started that journey by being in a pit of some kind. And so the relationship deterioration pit is where I'm finding these men to work with. And men are just so incredible and such an inspiration. The amount of pain that men will go through with no reward, with no bright light in sight, just for the sake of the people that they love and a whisper of a hope, of a dream that things could be different. It is unbelievable to witness. And I watch these men every day going through suffering for the sake of their family, for the sake of their wife, even when their wife doesn't want them to, and their wife rejects them. It's absolutely incredible. And so my philosophy is the more of those men that I can help turn into just savage, incredible versions of their potential, the better off the world is going to be. And all of the political and economic problems will eventually disappear if we have enough of those men. So that's an answer to one of the questions that you had asked me before, and I forgot the rest.
I love that, but let's boil it down. Let's get to the core of this.
Okay.
What is your philosophy of life? That's a better way of putting it.
What is my philosophy of life? My philosophy of life is that sovereignty should be every man's highest aim, and sovereignty means being able to operate from a place of autonomy and inner authority on your own terms, pointed at what you believe is the highest good. And again, that highest good will be different for all men. But if you put yourself in a position of sovereignty, which starts with your mind and your body, your subconscious, your belief systems, your relationship with God, if all of that gets to a good place, you can then begin to exert sovereignty and claim that in the real world. And I think if that happens, like I said, all of our problems get fixed. So that would be, yeah, my philosophy in life is the pursuit of sovereignty for the good of the people that you care about most.
So one thing that a lot of Christians bring up with that is, of course, that, and this is just a Christian argument. There's many different arguments, I suppose, against that. There's the communist argument that individuality is inherently selfish and it doesn't take care of the oppressed. But in the Christian context, the criticism I often hear when I use the word sovereign man is that there's only one sovereign, there's only one king, and his name is Christ. How do you answer that criticism?
I agree.
Right. So when you're saying sovereign, you're not saying Lord of the universe. What are you saying?
I'm saying that I am acting as if I am the highest authority in my own existence. And that's no different than saying extreme responsibility, extreme ownership. Um, if you're the king, if you're the sovereign, that means you have the ability to affect change in one direction or another. And if it's not going in the direction that you want, it's on you. So it's a position of extreme authority, but also extreme accountability. And the part of you, when I speak to inner authority and developing that part of yourself that can become the sovereign king, that can exert that kingly energy in the world. I'm a Christian myself, and I view that internal energy of inner authority. That's divine energy. That's the Christ in us. And I think the Bible is very clear that the Christ is in us, right? And I say the Christ, right? And so I don't view that as a contradiction at all. I view that as a calling, and I think we are called to be like Christ and to model Christ. And I think when you tap into that inner strength, that inner freedom, that inner sovereignty, that inner authority, that is the being of Christ moving through you and working through you in the world.
I think I can swing at this. Also being a Christian myself, the Christian argument that the Christ is the sovereign one. Are we not meant to be Christ-like?
Yeah, I agree with all of you. This criticism has been brought up by people in both of Zach and I's life that we love. And I'll give you another example of this because I think this is an important discussion. And it is one of our cousins has worked with Zach on producing an album, and I'm just going to say the name because I published it before, so I'm not revealing anything. But the name of the song is "The Lord of East Garifraxa." East Garifraxa is a township in rural Ontario that Zach and I's grandfather is from. And it's a great song. I know you like it, Matt. And the immediate criticism, and I won't say who, that I received when I told him the name was, well, there's only one Lord, right? And why would someone call themselves a Lord? And so I want to bring about that distinction because I think there's something that we've lost as a society in understanding what you're describing, Matt, which is radical responsibility comes with an element of authority. And just because we're saying that we want to be, we want to conquer ourselves, we want to become our own masters, we want to be a sovereign man, we want to be a Lord of East Garifraxa, the list goes on. But that could be, concerning to people who are dogmatic in their language about God. So I want to be clear at least what I mean and then hear what you guys think. But when I say that I want to be, quote unquote, the Lord of something, I'm saying I want to take extreme responsibility for that thing. That I want to have ownership of that thing, not in the capitalistic, let's call it, no, and I like capitalism, but not in that abusive using of a thing that you own, but in the caring for something you love about. And that starts, as you've described, Matt, with caring for yourself. And I want you to go into that a little bit because I don't think men, and I know this is the case for myself, I spent most of my life hating myself. And that had a lot of reasons we won't go into here. But how can you actually receive love from anyone, from a woman, from your family, from God, if you don't love yourself? You can't. You can't. And that's a first step in a kind of sovereignty, because even God can't give you love in the way that you can receive it if you don't love yourself. So, Matt, what do you think of that idea?
Yeah, you will not be able to experience God's love if you don't love yourself. Because you will reject it, right? Which is what I consider the definition of hell. And yeah, as far as Lord of Garifraxa,
You're Garifraxa, yeah.
Garifraxa,
Lord of East Garifraxa, but yeah.
There we go. I mean, I think some of those little word games that Christians play are very annoying and silly. And you choose the English translation of an ancient word, and it happens to also be a political term that can be used for the highest political authority in a region, and you confuse the two, and you use that to shut down other people and police their language. Those people are afraid of their own inner power, and they want to not see people around them with inner power. And they use the Bible as a weapon to bludgeon people with. And I don't have very much patience for that because I've seen a lot of it and I've been on the receiving end of it. And so, yeah, I don't have very much time for people who like to play word games with the Bible because I consider that taking the Lord's name in vain.
Ooh.
I like that. I like that a lot because I couldn't agree more. Because I want to dig into this more though. People that don't want to see people around them with inner power. Go into that, Matt.
This is really prevalent in Christianity. We've confused the idea of meekness, which, as Jordan Peterson has kind of publicly clarified, is more akin to the idea of being really, really good at using a sword, but choosing to keep it in its sheath. Right? That's a very different thing. That's like, okay, you become a monster, you become a savage, you become capable of incredible violence, but you choose peace. That's an incredibly beautiful and noble act. If a mouse chooses not to bite a lion, that's not nobility, right? But if a lion chooses not to swipe at a mouse, that is nobility. It's a very different thing. And so in the Christian church, we've confused what meekness means to think it means being passive and letting people have one over on you. And what turning the other cheek means is letting people take advantage of you, letting them mistreat you and not saying anything, being a punching bag. And you can look at the direction that the Protestant church has taken, and the Catholic church to some degree too, but more so the Protestant church in the last 50 years. And it's a whole bunch of men like this that are running the churches. And you can feel that when you walk into a church, there's no strength in so many churches. And it's horrible to see, and it's horrible to walk into a church and instead of feeling awe and strength and freedom and worship, you feel the sense of contraction and tightness and ick. And those are people who have been trained to view their own inner power as a threat to God. And no man's inner power is a threat to God. Your inner power can be a threat to your relationship with God because you can misuse your inner power and it can move you away from God. You can use it to reject God and to put yourself in the place of God. But God wants you to be powerful. God wants you to do great and wonderful things. God wants you to turn mustard seeds into mountains. And that requires inner power. And so many Christians have trained themselves out of power in the name of being meek, which is nothing more than an excuse of wanting to, instead of admitting that you're afraid and powerless and weak, you want to call yourself righteous, but you're not righteous.
Yes.
And when those people try to play word games with people who are trying to do great things, I have no patience for them. And again, I think they are taking the Lord's name in vain when they use the name of the Lord to try to get other people to be weak like them.
That's just like I've never seen that perspective before. I've encountered annoying meekness many times, both inside and outside of church, but I've never heard it put that way, and I'm like flabbergasted by that statement. That's so good.
We gotta clip that, Zach. Like that is awesome. Ugh, it's so good because I've spent, as all of our viewers know, I am a committed Christian, though I am a horrible sinner trying to get better every day. And I was raised in the church. My dad's a pastor. I was homeschooled, so I'm very ingrained in, let's call it, the Christian mythos. And what you just described, Matt, is what I rebelled against when I left the church. I couldn't stand all of this weakness that seemed so prevalent everywhere. And I'm coming back to, let's call it, participatory Christianity, showing up, taking part in the sacraments, these things. But still, I have this, let's call it this pain or this anger towards these weak leaders who are leading, I think, people astray by teaching them that what Christ calls us to do. I mean, can you imagine anyone stronger than Christ to take on that much suffering for us? It's unbelievable. It is an act of insane will and strength. And to say that you're following that man and then to be as weak as we see most Christians be, I think I agree with you, Matt. I think it's heresy. I think it's wrong, and it's a heresy that has taken over much of the church. It's interesting that we're talking about that right now. But I want to. We've already been going for over an hour. I don't want to. I want to be respectful of our listeners' time. But Matt, you've been through a lot over your life. You've seen the pit of darkness, of despair. You've witnessed the things you care most about crumble. You've witnessed them be reborn. I want you to talk a little bit about that process, because a lot of people are afraid of getting to that point. That their whole life is avoiding that point, but that point made you the man you are today. I know for myself, the darkest period of my life, where you actually started coaching me in my early 30s, led to the greatest successes of my life, because it was only in admitting that I was all of these things that I didn't want to admit, and that I did need to improve, and that I wasn't so great as I'd always thought I was, that I was able to accomplish the greatest things in my life, the greatest of which is being able to actually have a marriage that works and a son that I love. But those things were not available to me in my previous state before that pit, let's call it. What would you recommend to men to confront that pit, to go into that pit, to actively say, okay, I'm going to go face all these things I don't like about myself instead of avoiding them?
Yeah, I have particular exercises that I take my clients through that are 20, 30 minutes long and have an insane impact. But explaining them doesn't help anybody here. Those are experiential processes. We go through that, get at the subconscious mind at a root level using techniques from esoteric mystery traditions and neurolinguistic programming and Carl Jung's active imagination and all these things. Without doing that, the most important thing you can do is be honest with yourself. And it's so difficult to do. Not difficult because the truths are painful, but difficult because by the time you're 20 or 30 or 40 years old, the things you're hiding from yourself are so well hidden that somebody could smack you in the face with them and you're not willing to see them. You won't be able to see them. Right. And an example of this would be, a guy who serially dates disastrous women, right? And thinks the problem is all women, right? Everybody around him knows, dude, well, you always pick them up from this bar at this time of night after this many drinks, and they're always dressed this way. Like you're playing a role in picking the wrong kind of woman here, right? But you can explain to somebody, you can explain to them the problems that they're creating for themselves, but the reason that those problems keep persisting is because they're hiding them from themselves. So it's very, very hard. And that's why it takes these rock bottom moments for people's worlds to fall apart, for they go, okay, I guess I don't know what I'm doing. Like maybe I'm wrong. And then it's like, oh, now the transformation, now the healing can begin. So that's why it's difficult to be honest with yourself, because we hide things from ourselves. And by definition, that means we don't know they're there, and we don't know that we're hiding them from ourselves. So you have to get really honest with yourself. What am I hiding from myself? And it helps to get into kind of a calm meditative state, do a little bit of slow breathing, do it when you're driving your car and you're in kind of that Zen state, making all the right turns without even noticing, right? And from that place, ask yourself, what am I fucking up that I know I'm fucking up that I should definitely stop doing? And if you ask yourself honestly, you'll get an answer, and you'll know it's the right answer if it's a really, really painful one. And I know that sounds exactly what Jordan Peterson says, but
it's true. But it's true.
I'll
give an example for myself. I was an alcoholic. I wasn't willing to admit that I was an alcoholic. When I finally admitted I was an alcoholic, I started to change. Right.
That's right.
And it's almost 3 years, which I would argue is the greatest achievement of my life so far. Because that was conquering myself. I thought I was going to drink until I was dead, right? I loved alcohol. It was my whole life. I mean, you and I spent our entire friendship up until when we stopped drinking together. That was what we did together.
That was all my friendships.
Yeah, yeah. So the final thing that I want to address that I think will be very profound is there's this movement called the Red Pill movement. I'm sure you've heard a lot about it. A lot of men are sucked into it. This women hating movement, right? That views women as objects, that treats them like they're inferior. There's a lot of really negative things about it. You're the opposite of that in my mind. However, when you talk about women, you talk about how they are different than men. And I think that distinction, though talked about in the Red Pill movement in a very toxic way, in your case, in a very loving and nurturing way, or protective, masculine way, would be a better way of putting it. Can you talk about your thoughts on the Red Pill movement and how you are different than that, and how your approach is helping men rebuild their relationships with women instead of causing them to be more divided?
Yeah. I wouldn't say I'm the opposite of Red Pill. I would say the opposite of Red Pill is more like modern feminism or something. And I would say those are both pathologies of healthy masculinity. And I put myself in healthy masculinity. So if you think of it as like a triangle, the bottom two corners of the triangle are feminism and Red Pill. And then at the top is healthy masculinity. And that's where I put myself. And I'm not entirely opposed to Red Pill. I think the net outcome from a lot of the things that they teach is terrible. But I think it's playing a wonderful societal role. So let me kind of justify why I'm saying that. Red Pill will not lead to a healthy relationship. Red Pill is very, very good at picking up young, naive girls at the bar or damaged women. And if you want either a string of young, naive, damaged women or young, naive women that you damage, Red Pill will work very well for you. If you want a long-term relationship, the only way that Red Pill works is if you marry somebody whose spirit is broken and you're content to live with a slave. If that's the relationship you want, Red Pill will work very well for you. But Red Pill will not bring you to a long-term fulfilling relationship. Now, that said, there's problems with Red Pill. There's also a good thing about Red Pill. Andrew Tate, for all of his character flaws, he has still brought a very powerful message to the world, right? He was basically an online pimp. I'm pretty sure he was a drug dealer and a gangster, and he's done all kinds of unsavory, terrible things. Nonetheless, if you look at history, a lot of positive revolutionaries and people who did a lot of moral good were horrible, horrible people that turned their lives around at some point. And so I don't hold that against him. And I think he's also moderated his message a lot as far as the stuff that's, blatantly disrespectful and blatantly demeaning to women. Talking about stories where he laughs about how he would lie to them so he could cheat on them and they wouldn't know, and they're so stupid and so easy to trick. And these are awful things, right? And I think he wouldn't say that anymore. But, whatever. The point is whether he's good or bad. The point is, I think his impact on society is actually wonderful because he's made it okay to talk about the differences between men and women again. He's made it okay for young people to say, I want to strive for more. Now, should they be striving for his vision of, a castle, a helicopter, sports cars, and 5 girlfriends? Like, no, that's an arbitrary, immature, unhealthy vision. But at least someone's telling the kids to strive for a vision, right? We need that. And at least he's doing that. And he's created a space for people like me to come in and say, hey, there's actually a healthy way of doing this. And yes, he's right. Red Pill is correct. Men and women are different. But that isn't now an excuse to go exploit those differences to create slaves out of women and to set you up as some petty tyrant in your marriage or in your series of one night stands. That's a deeper understanding of the reality that God has created so that you can steward that reality more effectively. And no truth ever makes you worse at operating effectively in the world. Any truth you understand ever will make you a more effective operator in the world. And the more that I understand how women actually operate, right, by being married to one who I was almost divorced from, by having a daughter, by healing my relationship with my mom, all of these things have helped me understand women. And the more I understand them, the more I go, we're so different, it's almost incomprehensible. And every day I talk with dozens of men every single day, because we have group coaching in addition to my one-on-one. So I'll talk to 50, 60 men in a day sometimes. And the amount of stories I hear of how women do things in a certain way and men do things in a certain way. And the more you understand this, you can actually, it's not as hard to have a healthy relationship as we're told. But what we're told right now is men and women are the same and you have to treat each other the same. And we're surprised when all of our marriages start falling apart and women start leaving much more so than men. It doesn't have to be that way. There is a healthy model of masculinity that recognizes men and women play different roles, but that doesn't mean we want to go back to the 1950s and get, have her pour a glass of whiskey and give us a foot rub when we get home from work at the end of the day while she goes and vacuums the living room, right? No one's advocating a return for that. I don't think that's a healthy way of living. I don't think that's evolutionarily consistent with how we're supposed to, have families and interact on a relationship level. I think that was a historical aberration on this side, and now we're just on the other side, and both of them don't work. But we need to recognize there are differences. We need to recognize tradition and gender roles teach us a lot, and then we need to adapt that to make it work in the modern world for our individual relationships. But designing a relationship from scratch based on the idea that men and women are the same and me and my wife are identical is such a recipe for unbelievable failure, as we're seeing play out right now. It's impossible to overstate that. So recognize you're different, recognize you need to play different roles, and then tailor those different roles to your individual strengths and weaknesses so that you find a balance of those things that work for you. And the relationship for you and your wife and you and your wife and me and my wife is going to look different in each case. But if we use the historical framework of male female, that's a much better starting point than a blank slate, which doesn't exist in the first place.
Any thoughts, Zach, before we end it here?
No, I have so many notes. I'm taken aback by how many wonderful, wonderful things you've said. And for anyone who wants to find what you do and learn from you more, we're obviously going to link it in the show notes, but why don't you do a quick little blurb about where people can find you online and what you offer there?
Yeah. Best place to find me is Instagram at _sovereign_man. And that's a bunch of short form content on helping men restore their masculinity and save their marriage. So a lot of really practical tips to help people save their marriage. And again, we've saved marriages from people literally living in different countries, different homes. She's dating somebody else. And every horrible scenario you can imagine. And I'm saying, if you imagine a horrible scenario, we've saved marriages in that case. We've seen everything. And so lots of really useful tips and tricks for how to do that. If you want more transformative coaching, reach out to me on Instagram. And we're also launching long form on YouTube in the next few weeks. And that'll also be at, I think it's The Sovereign Man. I don't think there's underscores, but I'm not entirely sure. It might be underscores, but we'll be on YouTube in the next week or two as well.
Amazing. Well, you heard it first, gentlemen. Saddle up and go get your girl back. Thank you, Matt, so much for being here. It's every time we get to talk to you, it's incredible, and I get to learn so much, and I feel so thankful even just to have the opportunity to do these interviews with you. You're an amazing dude to talk to, and you're a wonderful example for men of all ages, and I want to commend you and thank you for that.
Thank you so much for saying that. That really, really does mean the world to me. And awesome to be here. I love you both. It's always fun talking to you. So yeah, super happy I'm here.